We are on to lesson number 3. We're going to do a little review first about from lessons number 1 and number 2 so you know which pieces we're working with. I'm going to be looking first at lesson 1, and these are the sets that I made for set number 1. And so for set number 1, I did 12 half square triangles, and I'm making the queen size one out of these fabrics. So my accent color is that cream colored bubbly fabric that you're seeing there. And then my other elements are grays and fuchsias, greens, navy, black. And so those are going to be my units. So I have 12 sets of 12 that I made of these. So this is set 1. I will not be working with set 1. I just want to be able to set this aside because I'm not going to be working with that in lesson number 3. And so we've got all those set aside. So these are just set 1 from lesson 1, and we're going to be setting them aside because we are going to be working with set 2 for lesson number 3, and set 2 is on page 1. Now, as we look at lesson 2 that we worked with, we had the squares and rectangles. And these are the squares and rectangles that I created out of my sets. And these guys I had done up into sets using a mixture of the fabrics. As you can see, my accent color is the diagonal chain in those. If I was making a throw size, I would make 12 of these finished units. For a queen size, I made 20 of these finished units. And so I've got my finished units that I have set aside for these pieces. And these are measuring 12.5 by 12.5 raw edge to raw edge. And so I've got these set aside using my mixture of fabrics. So you can see that chain, the accent is very prominent in what I've put together. Now we're going to be going to lesson number 3, and we're going to be cutting. And we're going to be cutting something very small this time, and we're going to be working with just 1 unit. And so as I'm cutting this, I'm going to show you, I'm going to be cutting, these are my set 2s. So in set 2, I had 4 flying geese, and then I had some half square triangles. So I have 4 half square triangle sets that I built with my accent fabrics. And then with those pieces that matches in between there, I had some other units that I had set aside. Well, with those other half square triangles I set aside, I am putting them up against some new flying geese that we're going to be building in this lesson. So you see those 4 triangles we put together, that's what we're going to be making those out of. And so they are going to actually be pairing up with that. Notice how that's a flying geese unit that measures 2.5 by 4.5 raw edge to raw edge. It's a 2 by 4 inch. Now this new unit that I'm building in lesson 3 is also 2 inch by 4 inch, and it's a 2.5 by 4.5 inch raw edge to raw edge. Now the height of those little triangles, they are a quarter square triangle in there. So the height of that is finished 1 inch because it's half of what that 2 inches. Therefore, I'm going to be cutting those little triangles out of a 1.5 inch strip of fabric, and then I'm going to be sewing them together. And so here's some of the other units that I started pairing up. And what I did was I looked for some really great contrast in there. And so on this one I have more black fabrics, and so I chose the contrast to be the magenta. And so we're going to be building just that triangle of the 4 little triangles together. And so those guys are going to be going together with these units, and we're going to be using them together in a very unique way. This is a triangle set that I've never taught in Mystery Mondays before, so we're going to be exploring this a little bit. Now, I'm going to start with a strip because I'm going to show you what size I'm going to cut this at. And if I was going to cut it, I've got my accent fabric off to the side, and I have a smaller piece of this fabric because I want to show you how I would be cutting this piece. So again, remember, this is only 1 1/2 inches that I'm going to be cutting for the strip. That's because it's a finished size of 1 inch height of that quarter square triangle. That means I would be adding a 1/4 inch to either side, which is why I'm adding 1/2 inch to 1 inch, because the height of that whole unit is 2 inches finished, And so each of those quarter square triangles are 1 inch finished in height. And then I'm going to be cutting that from a 1 1/2 inch strip. So now when I cut my first piece, because my first line is not necessarily as straight as I want it to be, I'm cutting past the 1 1/2 inches. I'm going to swing it around, and now I'm going to trim it out at 1 1/2 inches. I would recommend that you not cut any more than one, maybe two fabrics at a time, because these are so small you want to make sure you're doing the most accurate job you can get. So I'm going to be needing 3 of the magenta quarter square triangles for each of these units that I have. So I'm going to get in really close so you can see how I'm cutting this. Now if you notice, I'm laying that on the strip. This is a quarter square triangle ruler. So this is my good measure Nifty Notions quarter square triangle ruler. Now I'm not going to bother cut a half square triangle first, because I just want to demonstrate to you the only thing I'm going to need out of this little strip is a lot of quarter square triangles. So I'm going to be laying it out there. I've got 4 fingers on my ruler, thumb is off. I'm looking that all those marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, those are all the breaks in that line, are lined up with that bottom piece. I'm going to do my first cut. I'm going to cut back on this one, and now I've got my quarter square triangle. Then I'm going to turn my ruler over, and I'm lining up that left hand side with my cut, and I'm making sure that I have that line in there so it is even with that 1 1/2 inch line. Now on occasion when I'm doing a quarter square triangle, I might get a little bit of fabric off to the side, which I can actually go back and clean up. And I have been known to do this because it's just too hard to try to get that in there absolutely perfect. So I cleaned out just a smidgen of that. And now I'm going to do my next cut. So I've got my 2 quarter square triangles. And now, if you notice when I go to turn it around, my strip is not wide enough. Because I work a lot out of scraps or fat quarters, I don't typically cut a whole width, especially when I'm doing something as narrow as 1 1/2 inches, because when I'm cutting that narrow on a long strip, it's kind of hard to keep it as straight as I want it to be to get the accurate cuts. So I am a fan of cutting shorter strips, maybe the length of the fabric out of a scraps or even half of the piece in order to get it as accurate as I can. So I'm going to keep cutting, and I'm going to be laying down my quarter square triangle and trimming these friends out. Flipping my ruler over. And if you want to keep cutting those half square triangles off on the side, have at it. Just please make sure you're going to use it for something. Otherwise it becomes that great stash of, gee, I don't know what I cut this for. There we go. I've got several of these are quarter square triangles. So look at how that's built. So then I just need my accent fabric for the middle of this piece. Let's set those friends aside. Now I'm going to go and pull my accent fabric out. Now when I have this accent fabric, I have this intentionally where I'm just showing you the height of the fabric, not the full width of it, because I don't want a really big piece cut out of this at a time. So I'm using my 14-inch ruler here, and clearly this is a mistake to walk that ruler up there. And the reason I say that is when I go to turn it around, it maybe isn't going to be as even as I want it to be. When you walk a ruler up, it's really not designed to cut a border or anything. And so what I'm doing now is I'm pulling out my long ruler, and clearly I can see my line isn't even close to straight. So what I'm doing here is that I am absolutely willing to recut it. But again, remember, when I cut that first strip, I always overcut it, so that I can come back and fix it. Then I'm less likely to make a mistake. So what I'm going to do first is I'm cutting it at almost 2 inches. So I'm cutting a little bit closer to the selvage. Now I'm really confident to swing that strip around. And actually I'm just going to flip it over in this case. This accent fabric is really firm fabric for me, and it works really, really well for this piece. And then I'm going to go ahead, and now I've got a perfect cut there, and I'm cutting it 1.5 inches. I like to show you how I work on things like this because people think that because I do this so often that I'm really perfect at it. I'm not. And I think it's important for you to see that I make probably as many mistakes as you do. I might make more because I sew a little bit more than you do, but I'm also much kinder to myself about it. The little bit of fabric I'm wasting is not worth the self-esteem bump that I'm going to get of talking smack to myself. It just is not worth it. If you wouldn't talk to your niece or your granddaughter or the kid in your neighborhood that way, you ought not talk to yourself that way. So it's never too late to start talking nicer to yourself. And there we go. I've got some quarter squares swinging along here, and I'm just going back and forth and cutting them. Again, taking my time, cutting just 2 layers at a time. They're turning out just fine. So let's go back and look to see what this looks like. This is a stack of beautiful triangles, and this is a really fun one to put it together. So when I sewed them together, I found it was really good to sew those 2 squares together, the bottom first, and then sew the other pieces on them. I chose to make mine with the accent in the middle be the light. I could have switched this around as well, but that was what I like to do with mine. And so when I sew it together, notice I'm going to sew those 2 together first, and then I'm going to press it back, and then I'm going to sew one side on, and then I'm going to sew the other side on. And that will be technically a pieced flying goose unit. Now let me show you another way you could do this. You could actually, if you have enough accent fabric, you could make all the fabrics around that be your accent fabric, and you could put that dark fabric in the middle. That is your call. This is what I chose to do. This is what I could have done. I still like my choice, but it's your call, what you want to do. They both work just fine. And there we go. And see how that little accent triangle is in there. Now the other thing I found choosing them to do the way that I did them, I chose to use a fabric that was a high contrast to those flying geese to the sky units. All right, if I'm taking this to AccuQuilt, then the die that I would use to cut those tiny little quarter square triangles is from a 4-inch cube. The 4-inch cube is fairly new. It's very small. This piece is it's going to be 1.5 inches tall of a quarter square triangle. I didn't think I'd be a fan of making anything this small, but this affords me the chance to fit that in there. So the whole flying geese unit is from an 8-inch cube. And if you notice, the 4-inch cube, that quarter square triangle, is half the size of it. So it pieces together marvelously. It's really beautiful to find this tiny, tiny piece fit into there. That 4-inch cube unit, though, will also fit into other units. So these are things that if many of us have stopped piecing really small things because we can't cut accurately. This is why people have been more attracted to things like the 4-inch cube. Now, when I go through there, I need 3 of these triangles for each of my blocks times 4. I need 12. So I am sending 3 stacks of fabric through my cutter to cut to get me enough pieces. So for every color that I send through there, that's what I'm going to get. Now if you notice, I left a longer fabric on the end. I didn't trim it down further because I might be able to use that little strip for something else with that rectangle. Now the other thing that you would do is that you would send through only 1 fabric of the accent if you're using the triangle the way that I used it, because for each square that you get, for each unit that you get, you're going to need 12 of that darker fabric and 4 of that smaller, my accent fabric around there. So you would only send 1 fabric through and then 3 of your dark. So that's how I did the math on this. It pieces together so beautifully using this little cube piece. And so this is an option for you as well to work with it. Okay, let's head over to the sewing machine now. So going to my machine, I'm going to be sending these pieces in. Uh, First off, when I send them, I'm going to put the triangle together out here in front of me so I can see where all those elements fit together. So I am going to do a little bit of auditioning in front of the sewing machine. And if you notice, I'm going to be setting those 4 triangles together. So my plan to go through this into the sewing machine are that I'm going to put the bottom of a dark and the accent together. So my background fabric, the dark, I'm going to put it together with my accent fabric. And so I'm going to be sewing this on the bottom, the base of the triangle. Now, when I go into the machine, I'm going to raise my foot slightly. And if I'm using the specialty ruler method, as you notice, I'm going to have those points out there. So I'm sending it in. I'm using my Annie's Tailor's awl to make sure that it feeds in exactly where I want it to be. And I would suggest when you're doing this, depending on your accent fabric these days, some of our cotton fabrics feel a little different. The gray good, Greige good, has a tendency these days to be a little bit different in fabrics. So I like using that awl to be able to get that underneath there. But also you want to try out which side is going to be straight up. And then if you notice with this, I took my point-to-point turner and I press it towards the dark. So I'm pushing everything away from that light. And so now I'm going to put one of my triangles onto the side. Now notice how I line that up. I line it up so that the 2 sides are square there. Now I love my clippers, my Ginger clippers, because you can also snip off those little dog ears before you go in. And that way it'll keep a little bit of that bulk out of there. So I'm going to work it into the sewing machine, and I'm sewing on triangle number 3 to that set. I'm going to go ahead and open up my next set, press it towards the darks. Point-to-point turner is something you should have one by your sewing machine and one in your packing case. And if you have 2 machines you sew at, get it by both of them. I love that little tool. It's inexpensive and really efficient to work with. So I'm going to add on my 3rd triangle to this unit. Now in this case, you can see as I'm working through the units, I am going in here, and I want to show you this as I'm going to cut it off because I want to show you what is happening here. So I've got that edge, and I'm going to push it back, and you want to look at this before we go any further, because if you are using the specialty ruler and you have those points, you might want to be trimming these off and cleaning them up as you go along. Now the tricky thing about this, and I love the Ginger snips for this, they will handle that just fine. But the tricky thing is that you are going to have to stay ahead of this if you're using that. Now again, I'm working to find an accurate 1/4 inch. Now watch when I send that into the machine. Do you see where my seam allowance is going to be? It's right in the inside. That's straight, and then that's where my seam allowance is. It's starting at that V in there. This is only if you're using the specialty rulers are you going to run into those points. And you want to keep an eye on where that 1/4 inch is going in and coming out of the machine. I find that people have a tendency to speed up a little bit going out of the machine, and then you lose some critical points. Sometimes we're too far over going into the machine. That's really where people lose the nose of the geese and things like this. So how you go in and out of the machine does matter. And if you notice, as I'm working in there with that, I'm making sure, now this next one was cut with the AccuQuilt so you can see the blunted ends on it. What I love about both of these methods is they work companionably with each other. The specialty rulers, if you take your time and you take your time to learn how to use them, they will get better results than you will ever get with, quote, traditional piecing. So traditional piecing with this one, this unit is almost impossible to replicate to get that to the size that you want it. Now if you notice, I've got my flying geese unit here. So I'm going to add, just like we've done with all the flying geese. You always, like a book, like reading a book, you start left and right. So you're going to start on the left side and you go towards the right. If you notice there, I can't sew from the bottom to the top. I prefer to flip this over and sew from the nose of the flying geese unit down. That way your best sewing goes in first. You notice how I raise that foot up, and then I walk it into the machine. So I'm putting my left sky on at all time with flying geese. This is a flying goose unit. It's just it has a pieced flying goose. And so I keep working through, and I'm going to send this through the machine, and I've pressed it towards the dark, and I'm working on my next one. So if you notice, when I started this piece, I am sending my first one through while I'm still doing my next pieces. This gives me a chance to learn and not make a mistake by sewing together all those triangles and finding out I did something wrong. It gives me a chance to keep working incrementally and learning. Notice how I did not lose the points on that triangle in the center of that flying goose unit. I'm going to go back and clean up my corners then. The AccuQuilt removes all of those dog ears, and it's one of the features that I love about it, is it keeps me from having dog ears all over the place, especially when you end up with really unusual shapes where the dog ears can be problematic for you. As far as being a time saver and fabric saver, I think AccuQuilt really does better than what people think it's going to. You feel at first, like especially when I'm showing you some things like I could have saved more fabric. By the time you'd have tried to figure out how to save more fabric on that, you'd have lost more time, and your time is worth more than the little bit of fabric that you'll lose. Now notice how that AccuQuilt cut piece fits in there perfectly. It also, you're going to start noticing if you work with AccuQuilt especially, but also with the specialty rulers, you're going to see things in your sewing, like for example, when I come out of the machine, I can tell before I'm done with the unit that the block is square or it's not square. So I love working with these pieces, working around the block, working on the different units. I also got a chance to play with the different colors as I was working with them. Okay, now we're going to get going and we're really going to get sewing. So again, my first triangles that I sew together, the first ones that I did when I do these pieces is that I played with it and I sewed several units at a time, and I looked at them before I went on and sewed all of them together in chain piecing. Chain piecing is great for a lot of things, but when you're learning new skills like this, you're going to chain piece to a point, but you're going to stop and go back, check your work, and make sure that it's accurate. Notice how I do go in there and I will make sure that those edges are as clean and straight as possible. And that tailor's awl helps me to keep going underneath that. And I sew with that Annie's tailor's awl in my hand pretty much at all times. Especially when you're dealing with really tiny units like this, you don't have a long unit in order to where you can square it up down the road. And so I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to clip them out in between. So you want to get into the machine, under the needle. You want to get as simple and clean as you can. You want to get it as straight as possible. And then vice versa, when you come out, you want to make sure that you're coming out straight and even so that your block comes out evenly. Now on the left-hand side where I'm going through those units, I am picking what colors I want to put in there. Now notice when I put that left sky unit on the goose, I lay it down in the front, I turn it over. Now notice on the top of that you can see a little bit more green fabric coming out. That's because in that space, clearly somewhere along my piecing, I'm getting my 4 flying geese together, my 4 triangles together for goose, a little bit shy. I am going to truss the green fabric on the bottom because that was cut as one whole unit. And I did several of these before I started realizing where I was getting that little bit of a miss. But the great thing about that is I got a chance to experiment with it without unsewing, resewing, unsewing, and resewing. Now in these guys, you're going to be sewing together 4 of these flying geese units together for each of your triangles. And if you're doing a queen size, you're going to be doing this unit 48 times. I don't want you to get discouraged. It was much more satisfying than, I mean, when you look at piecing something this little small, you're like, I'm not piecing anything that small. Well, once you do, you develop an all new kind of love for sewing things together that are really intricate. And again, if you're still on the fence about AccuQuilt, I will tell you that it's because you can do fun things like this that make it great. Now, I think it's very important that you learn the specialty rulers, because what we're going to be doing as a bonus lesson to this one is I'm going to show you more about how you convert things over to not only AccuQuilt but to specialty rulers. A lot of times people will ask us, they'll say they wish we would have a class on how to read a pattern. And that would be like saying I'm going to learn all the languages in the world so that I can travel the world and understand what everybody's saying at all times. It's just not possible, because there is no guide to how to write a pattern that everybody will comprehend. And patterns are written, sometimes they're written to save pages, so they leave important information out. Sometimes they have too much information. Sometimes they try to get you to understand all the colors of every piece as you go along, and sometimes they don't give you enough understanding of that. They don't give you enough information, and you wish for more. What I want to do is that most people who piece and sew of any kind, or are creative of any kind, we tend to be a little bit bilingual. We can read instructions, but many of us read by pictures a little bit more because we don't always trust the instructions. So what I want to do is explore with you how you're going to understand which pieces go in which place. Some of it you'll get cues from the designer, and this one, the original designer, provides some really great clues in the pattern that you're going to be receiving. You'll find it very refreshing because you're going to see a lot of things about how to cut things in the manner that I'm teaching you. But then the other one that you're going to get is you're going to use units in the squares to help you determine what height a square should be, a strip should be. And oftentimes that is referred to by what other units are next to those pieces. And so that's going to help us quite a bit too. Now if you notice, I'm putting the left sky onto that goose, and I love because I can see the back from that, from everything that's pieced in. I'm pulling out one of my geese, and I'm doing my point-to-point turner, getting in place. I love the point-to-point turner because it really flattens out the unit without stretching the fabric. When we go right to an iron, when we're doing on small units like this, that's usually where we're distorting something. I don't recommend that you iron until the block is already set inside the setting pieces that you would be using. So this is the system that I'm using to build these 12 sets of 4 of these pieced flying geese units together. Now I'm adding on my right sky unit. And again, notice how I go into the machine. I hit right where that 1/4 inch is, and you can see that notch that informs it. And when I come out, I'm coming right off on that 1/4 inch. If you start well, you often can finish well. So I've got this set going together. Looks like my fourth one I just had started. I just didn't get any further than that. Sometimes I listen to books on tape while I'm sewing and I get a little distracted. I would also say that if you are just sewing, 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 and not listening to a book or spending some time thinking about other things, we have a tendency to get a little bit bored, a little bit distracted. And that's sometimes where we make the mistake. So I'm setting up this whole set together. And now I'm at a point where everything is in the machine. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to pull out another unit and start myself up another unit. So I've got another colorway for my next block that I'm using to get me into the machine so I can release that fourth unit to build my flying geese from. Point to point, doing its job. Adding my last triangle to this. It is easy to get that triangle after you get the first two together on there wrong. I only did it a couple of times in doing these, and I'm fine with that. But you know, it's a good thing I caught it, like because I'm doing pressing in as I go along. And if you do it a couple more times, just remove those stitches and don't talk bad to yourself. Again, I've lengthened my stitch out to about 2.7, 2.75 because I really don't need to cut out all those tiny little stitches when I'm unsewing, and I don't need it to be that tight. Now I'm adding that flying geese, the sky, onto the left side on my last unit. I flip it over so that the sky is on the bottom and that pieced goose is on the top. I love starting at the nose of the flying geese unit and working into the machine. Now I did have a few directional fabrics that I was working with on these, and I did manipulate them a little bit to get the stripes going that way, the quote, the right way. But to be honest, friends, these triangles are just 1 inch tall. Nobody's going to notice it that closely. So the little triangles that are in there are 1 inch tall. Look at how beautifully that fits in there. On many of my Bernina machines, we have a motor that is designed, it says DC motor, and it's designed to not get stuck in multiple layers of fabric. It kind of shovels through incrementally, and it's a very reliable motor. You can go through a lot of fabric at a time. And so like even on these tiny triangles, when I have the bulk of all them together, they really, this machine does a great job of getting through them. Very satisfying working this way. I love seeing how these guys are coming together. At first I wasn't going to do them as high of contrast, and after I got playing with them, I fell in love with how they were looking. In fact, I did recut a couple of them because I could see that I really wanted that high contrast. So there's my 4 half square triangles that are going to go with this set, and then my last pieces are my regular flying geese units to go with this set. Isn't that beautiful? Terrific. Terrific. So as I went in and started looking at these, I wanted to show you the progression of how I worked with these pieces. And the video that you're seeing right now is showing how I work with all 3 tools nearby, and when I send things through the machine to build them up, how I need these 3 friends that I'm rotating through. Sometimes I will do all four of the triangle sets, but not very often because I just really struggle with making sure that they go together well. I find that I work more efficiently this way. I hope you're finding some relief in doing that as well. It is a learned skill, and I know that a lot of people who've done Mystery Monday with us have at least tried this, and they find they make fewer mistakes. They get more satisfaction. They don't get as bored as easily. Give it a try, see what you think. And when I say give it a try, I don't mean just try it once. Try it multiple times. So I'm sending through more of those pieced together flying geese units. Very satisfying sewing. Now I did, when I got down to the end, because I had cut all of my units as I went along, I started realizing I needed to pair them up in ways that gave me good contrast. And invariably, when I got down to the 10th, 11th, and 12th, I wished I would have changed things. And I don't say that to tell you that you ought to change things. I didn't change a thing. I just kept on going. Because when it's all said and done, done is better than done perfect. And perfect really is in the eye of the beholder. I'm just sitting here looking at this fabric so close and over analyzing it. When the whole is done, I will be very satisfied with it. Look at how pretty these are turning out. I will tell you, this part of the lesson is the third one. One, because I was afraid I'd scare y'all off. But two, I wanted to make sure you had the confidence to do your piecing before you dug into this one. This is quite an accomplishment for everybody in Mystery Mondays, to be doing a pieced triangle that is a finished piece that's 2 by 4 inches. You can do this. Take your time. Consider getting a 4-inch cube if you're struggling with that. But, give yourself some grace and mercy. It really is rewarding to do. These took me quite a bit of time to put together, but this is the only part you have in this lesson. And so if you're still catching up from the previous weeks, just enjoy this process. I love working with you on Mystery Mondays. It's so much fun for me to watch how you interpret your colors and how much learning you have out of it. If you need help with any of these concepts or any more of it, please send me an email. I will be giving you some other lessons that are different projects showing you how to convert designs over. And so we're going to be having that as part of the lessons too. This is a bonus project, so I will be sending you publications to support this when we are done with Mystery Monday this next week. So they are the designer's original pieces. Next week is going to be our big reveal, and we're going to show you how this all finishes out. What a great explosion of color this has been, right? I hope you're enjoying seeing what's coming out underneath your needle. Happy stitching. Let's all be inspired to sew more and more and more. As you're working through these pieces, you're going to start seeing colorways that you never thought about. And as I worked through building these units, I had a great time realizing, one, how much I enjoyed putting them together like this. And I'm giving you a little bit of a clue here as to some of the ideas of the direction we're going to take these blocks in the last lesson. You're going to be so glad you worked on these pieces. As I was laying these out and enjoying how all of them went together, it kind of informed for me what I sometimes traditionally think how colors should be. And it also always gives me a chance when I'm working out of scraps and sometimes fabrics that I don't even really like by themselves, and see these great little surprises. I like the magenta with the navy. That I know. I absolutely know that. And I thought I liked the green with the magenta as well. However, what I was really surprised were the few times that I put a little color of the black with the turquoise. And that turned out really fun, and it was a great way to enjoy the color with this. And as I played with these colors and went putting them in there, I really appreciated something that I know has been a challenge for many of you is that you normally don't think this way. When you see the finished quilt, you might see the direction that the traditional pattern was written, but I intentionally wanted to work with the concept that many times we look for large amounts of backgrounds or contrast fabrics to inform what we can do. This design in particular is going to give you a chance to look at it, especially from lesson 2. You saw it a little bit about how something finished could have that accent color do the talking for you. And that's what we're seeing here. In many of the pictures that you're seeing on Friends of Inspired Sew, you're seeing some people that have chosen some colors that you might not have ever thought about. Somebody had chose like a bubblegum pink as their accent color. I've seen a couple of turquoises out there. Frankly, the color that I chose, the fabric that I chose, it really was more informed by, it was a fabric that was given to me. It was something that my mother had had, and I really didn't know what else I was going to use it for. And it came to me as I was digging through fabric, and I thought this is going to be perfect for this. And frankly, the yardage that I had on it, it was a little bit narrower than traditional yardage. It came really close when I was putting this together. So when I was telling you about doing those piece triangles, I didn't have a choice with doing those small piece triangles with my fabric because it was more like a 38-inch wide fabric. And so I would not have had enough to do more triangles on that inside. And I didn't let it stop me. I just kept on going because I had a lot of these other colors, these very rich jewel tone fabrics that have a little bit of metallic in them. These all have a little bit of silver in them. It's a very elegant looking quilt, and I'm really excited about how it's turning out. So as I was putting this out there, here's what's one of the metallics. It has a little bit of black in it. If you notice, that one in particular, that really close up, had a little bit of stripe in it. I didn't get worked out if it went wrong. This piece next that's coming up is the one that surprised me. I loved how that black looked with those aquas, and it was a happy thing. So I hope you're getting some happy discoveries as you're playing with your fabric. Don't be surprised if you're not real sure about it yet. Once you see it together, you're going to be happier with the way that it's going. This is also why I encourage you to trust this process. So thanks for being with me for Mystery Monday. I hope that this is inspiring you to sew more, to dig into your fabrics, and get you to be using up more of your fabrics, putting them into things that will surprise even you. Thanks so much for being here, part of this journey. I look forward to seeing you for our finish next week, and we will be talking more about converting more things over to the specialty rulers, and then also to be converting things over to AccuQuilt. These are both exceptional tools for you to learn more about piecing accurately and have more joy and confidence in what you're doing. But also, especially, you're going to be sewing with more accuracy. It's going to take you less time to cut, and you're going to make fewer mistakes. So we'll see you for the next lesson as well.